Good afternoon. I'm Karen Sedatal, the Interim Dean of Goizueta Business School. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the kickoff event for Emory University's 2020 Homecoming Activities, the Learning and Leading Goizueta Distinguished Speaker Series. We launched the series to create powerful connections between students, alumni, and the business community, and to share experiences and insights on the world of business. And today's speaker event certainly exemplifies this goal. While Goizueta Business School has many prominent alumni, Jim Lanzone stands out not only because of his highly successful career, but also because of the close connection he's maintained with our Goizueta community. Jim is a 1998 JD MBA graduate. He and his wife Shannon, who's also a graduate of Emory Law School, recently established the Apollo Scholarship Endowment for Visionary Leaders to support recruitment of MBA students. We're grateful for their generosity, as student scholarship support is crucial in enabling us to enroll the best and brightest students. And we're grateful to Jim for his willingness to share his time and wisdom with us and our students today. Jim Lanzone launched and grew a successful .com company while completing his degree at Goizueta. He sold that venture to Ask Jeeves in 2001 and joined their team as Senior Vice President of Product Management, and eventually rose to CEO, where he oversaw the company's rebranding to Ask.com. After a successful tenure at Ask.com, Jim returned to his entrepreneurial roots, reinventing his career in the media and entertainment industry by founding a video search engine startup. When this venture was acquired by CBS, Jim became the president and CEO of CBS Interactive and the first chief digital officer in the history of CBS. While at CBS, Jim was best known for driving the development of the company's numerous streaming services, including the 2014 launch of CBS All Access. This year, Jim pivoted his career once again by accepting the role of CEO for Tinder, the world's most popular dating app. Jim has graciously joined us today to talk about reinventing yourself in a world of disruption, a topic on many of our minds. He is joined by his friend Jeff Rosensweig, Associate Professor of Finance and Director of the Robson Program for Business, Public Policy, and Government at Goizueta. Believe it or not, Dr. Rosensweig was one of Jim's professors when he earned his MBA at Goizueta. And Jim even served as one of Jeff's research assistants. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff to lead what I know will be an exciting and thought-provoking conversation.
Well, thank you, Dean. And Jim, it's good to see you again. You're one of the successive people I taught. I can't take any credit, but we are very proud of you. I'd like to know what you took away from Emory, and some friends of yours, I know you've stayed in touch with some who are very successful, that has contributed to your success in your career. But I also know your family, great kids doing well academically. What has contributed to your success in career and life that you took away from Emory that you would advise others that they should specifically take away?
Awesome. Well, hello, Dr. J.
Good
to be here. Good to see you. I wish we could do it in person. Here in my office in the Bay Area in San Francisco. Wish I could be in Atlanta. But yeah, look, I mean, probably the best way to phrase it is just by example and just what happened at Emory. Switching over from the law school to the business school, which is essentially what I did. I did 2 years of law school, and then thanks to the guidance of Julie Barefoot and the team there, bringing me over, joined the MBA program, and it was like seeing in color for me. The best thing I got out of law school was meeting my wife Shannon on the first day of law school. Wow. Tapped me on the shoulder because we were both from California. I was wearing a shirt, so we've been together for 26 years now. But yeah, I mean, just from day one, I mean, and I had never worked, because when you go to law school, you don't have to have a job first the way you do for business school. So, but it came very naturally to me, even taking classes like the HR class, or, pretty much everything except decision information analysis, which was a real stumper for a right brain kid like myself. But yeah, I mean, so, that first summer I wound up interning for an Atlanta-based internet company. or at least it was a traditional internet company. They didn't have a web presence, and that allowed me to, they charged me with doing it. So with no experience, I started building internet products and managing engineers. And then with Roger Barnett and Rick Carano, who were two of my classmates from my class at business school, we started eTour while we were in school. Roger was the CEO, Rick was the CFO, and I was essentially the product guy. And we wound up, by the time we graduated in 1998, we had over $1 million of funding, 15 employees, and we were the number one site on the web in user retention. And so with that product. So obviously Emory was an incredible launch pad for me, and literally without Emory, I absolutely would not be here. I never would have, first of all, even ventured into business, let alone, had the foundation I did to start off.
And it does seem you've taken lifelong friendships, which I think is a wonderful thing.
One of my two of my absolute best friends in the world, Xander Lurie, who many people here probably know is the CEO of SurveyMonkey, and Scott Bowman, who was another classmate of mine. So probably pretty much the smartest person I've ever met. They're two of my best friends. I have a lot of other friends from school as well.
I won't compare your grades to Scott's, but you, that leads me to something, which is, I remembered you, and I've taught thousands of students, literally, amongst other things. You have a great sense of humor, and you're a good writer, as well as a public speaker.
Can't add, so I have to.
Yeah, exactly. But if, I was wondering, so many students and so many young executives, especially at this time of disruption where people are losing their jobs, they're trying to get on the radar screen of more, higher level people like yourself who hire. How do you break out from the crowd? Is it with some sense of humor, or some ways not to be boring, but still being appropriate? Do you find a sense of humor, for instance, important, or some kind of flair? And how do they do it appropriately?
Well, look, I always, at least at CBS, the 9 years I was there, I would always give a talk to the interns, and we definitely had our number from Emory. And, my advice for that's a little different. I think sense of humor, and by the way, I can add, just to make sure you understand. Things like that are helpful just in leadership, right? But when you're starting out, whether it's at a college or at a business school, you're starting, unless you start a company, which is also a great alternative for somebody to get a lot of experience. I would always say, it's not like you go to some big company and you have a plate with one pea on it, or just eat that pea. It's like you get a whole plate full of food and you got to do all of it, and you can't hide at a startup. But let's say you joined a bigger company. What I would say about, let's say, sense of humor, but I would actually call it EQ, is those are the kinds of people other people want to work with. They're people who know how to prioritize. They know how to be good teammates. They know how to not create drama. Because life is hard enough, I would say. You don't need to add drama to it. I just always love to avoid political animals. I know of a company, I just listened to a podcast today. They do an amazing thing when they interview people. They take them to lunch with a group of people, and they see how they treat the waiter or waitress. And it tells them everything they need to know about how that person works with others and how they treat somebody that they don't have any relationship with or power over. I think that's more important. And then it's just about getting started. I think the 80-20 rule is appropriate in many forms of life. And it's the same thing for people. So 10 to 20% of people at a company at all levels are the ones who really become essential, counted on for things. They're always naturally given more responsibility. Then they get a good reputation. Then they'll get recruited by other companies. And, over the years, I'd say, whether it's Emory or Silicon Valley, my network has also been a huge part of making my way in the world. And I think that's a big part of it too.
I'm glad you cited the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, but you said 10 or 20%, because sometimes I think it's 10%, 90%.
Yeah, I think sometimes it absolutely can be.
And you really were one for us. And speaking about EQ and keeping yourself balanced, I just wanted to say that no one ever knew that you gave the scholarships for the Apollo scholarships. And Maimonides said the highest form of charity is when you keep it anonymous. And we have all this time.
Now we blew it.
Well, no, but I think it shows you and a lot about your ethics. I would like to talk and pivot for a second and talk about when is the right time to move on? Andrea Hirschadter, who, of course, you know, Dean of the BBA program, made an excellent point. Like, you had these successful startups, you pivoted into very high level roles with big companies and then bigger companies, really made CBS what it is, an interactive company, a digital company. Now, Match.com has a $30 billion market cap, but Tinder's probably 27 billion out of that, the brands you run, et cetera. But could you help the alumni on the call and the students know, and particularly the alumni, when is it time to move on? What are some signals to you that it's time to pivot, that kind of thing?
Okay, so I'll give maybe two answers. One, just my experience, and maybe advice I would give somebody else with different experience. So, you know, as someone who's managed a lot of people. So on my experience was, we had a startup, we hit the buzzsaw of the Web 1.0 market crash. So what we sold to Ask Jeeves, we had hit the peak. I mean, we had raised over $50 million. We thought we were going public. I mean, we had actually written this, wanted to go public, and we're counting our money, it was 20 somethings, and then the market crashed and we went on fumes essentially until we sold to Ask Jeeves. And I was part of that deal. I was kind of like chattel that went with the company. And I got really lucky. I found a mentor there. He made me the head of product, and I naturally grew up into the CEO of the company. After that, it was a 7-year run, and we turned Ask Jeeves around. Probably the worst brand you could have inherited, I think. Yeah. Do that with. It was, kind of the people like to kick that brand around. But, by the time 2008 rolled around, I really was itching to go do a startup again. And yet now I had this big company experience. We were a public company. We joined IAC. I worked directly for Barry Diller for 3 years. So it was a weird thing. And I had a soul searching moment. I got an offer to be a public company CEO. It was in 2008. Or I could take investment from Bill Gurley at Benchmark, who's one of the best venture capitalists of all time, to do this startup, which was, and I honestly, I would just sit there just going over this decision. So anyway, long story short, I wanted to do in the startup. By the way, then the market crashed again, but that's a different story. And then we got bought by CBS. So if you think about my career, 23 years until this job, I started 2 companies, got acquired, and kind of rose up through for both times. And I stayed at CBS until the merger with Viacom in December, which coincided exactly with the end of my contract. They do contracts. I had 3-year contract. It was about 9 years, and I was ready to go be my own boss and do something again. So we'll see what the answer to that next is. For other people, one of the things is, I do think either it in your gut that it's time to go do that thing you dreamed of. That might be being an entrepreneur. It might be going nonprofit. I have a good friend who ran the Hong Kong office for Wells Fargo for 10 years. He just moved back to the Bay Area to run a nonprofit, like that. And he's so happy doing that. There's also something that happens, which is you may just get blocked. I mean, the better a company is, the less turnover they have in the executive ranks. So separate from maybe you don't share the same values as the company, which I think is also a big one, or the CEO. Maybe it's just that you've been blocked off and it's time you got to go somewhere else to get that chance to grow, which I think is also important, because you got to think ahead career-wise for where you're going to be 5-10 years down the road, or you'll wind up getting stuck.
That's a great point of how they can avoid being stuck. And when Andrew and I were speaking, could you identify kind of the traits? You've been able to do both, entrepreneur, and you're modest, but Clicker was a major thing that you developed, entrepreneur and a successful executive at big companies. And you didn't go into CBS, as I said, to be a caretaker. You revolutionized it. I think you were streaming before streaming was cool. You were one of the founders.
It's starting to become cool, just not for broadcast networks.
Yeah, that's true. So can you talk about, for the people out there, so many, when I speak to alumni, maybe they're frustrated where they are, and they want to be entrepreneurs, or at least they think they do.
Yeah.
You talk about the very specific traits, though. If someone sat you down and said, "This is me, should I take the plunge or not?" What are the traits that would make a successful entrepreneur? Or who's the person that should stay in corporate America?
Well, Okay, so I actually think, knowing so many entrepreneurs the way I do, some have that Steve Jobs quality of just, they're a field general, they know where they want to go, they have the vision, put everything on their back. Other people like Reid Hoffman or Daniel Ek at Spotify or others are very quiet people. They're not really rah-rah field general types, but they're so smart. They have a great strategy. They know how to build a team around them. Reid's at Netflix for 20 years. Like I'd say he's maybe in the middle of all that. He's a good CEO, but I wouldn't call him, he's not the kind of person who wants to go run a big company that's not his.
Yeah.
The thing about being an entrepreneur that I always say, because there's so many times when I've had friends come and sit across from me in my office and ask for the advice or be looking, really what they're doing is running the idea by me. And what I always can tell is, because remember, 99% of startups don't work out.
Yeah.
You have to know that going in. But what you have to feel, and I would imagine this is the same way if you're going to quit your job to go to Hollywood or quit your job to go join a band, is you just don't want to die with your music still in you, right? And you want to go, the world has to have this product. And you don't care what happens if you're going to go make, you have to get this product out into the world. And that's harder to do when you have more at risk. So if you have gotten older, you have a family, even though many of the best startups are by people over 40, it's still, you're risking more at that point than if you're in your 20s, which I'd say go for it, because you really literally have nothing to lose at that point. But for me, like take Jeffrey Katzenberg just at Quibi, it just shut down yesterday. Everybody's making fun of it. Give him credit. He, with a huge reputation, was convinced, probably wrongly now, it turns out, but we'll never know, maybe because of COVID, but he was convinced that the world needed that product.
Yeah.
He raised $2 billion and put a whole awesome team together and built a really good looking product and made, multiple Emmys that they won for Quibi.
That's right.
And it didn't work.
Yeah.
And, he handled it with total grace and his head held high. And I think because he got it out of him, he did what he needed to do. And for a lot of other people, it turns into Facebook. But here, but that would be the trait, I think, is you just feel so passionate, you got to do it.
No, I'm glad you said that. And it really isn't for everyone, but it's a great thing in all of our lives, by mine too. You don't want to be at the end with regrets that you didn't go for something.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about streaming, since CBS was really just a television channel and you brought it into streaming, and then so many others came along. Then I want to talk about that in terms of, you had a lot of opportunities after CBS, and you went with Tinder and all the various brands of Match, and I want to move us toward why Tinder, why Match, and are you, especially in a time of disruption, are you going to bring more video and your expertise in these things to those kind of sites? So it's that kind of flow, wherever you want to cut into that.
Like, well, look, the streaming wars that they now call them, we're just coming off of launch of Disney Plus and Peacock and HBO Max and all these things. When I started we were acquired in March of 2011. There was no streaming. We did have a lot of people using CBS.com at that point, but if you go all the way back to that time, it was still 2 years before Netflix had House of Cards.
Yeah.
So they were streaming, but it was still very early. The only other thing that was really big at that time was Hulu, which had the other three networks' content on there for free in one click in one place, which was a real unfair advantage. But they were off and going, but they had just started their subscription service. So I walked in, and what I usually do in these situations, I'm doing it again now. The analogy I would use is, everyone here has played Jenga. What I come in and start doing in these situations is, I just start poking at the blocks and seeing what might move, right? And that involves looking at the data, understanding user behavior, understanding what products you have that are working, that aren't, and being able to leverage a big audience. And Ask Jeeves, it turned out that we had 18 ad products on the page, and we had this old Ask Jeeves product that nobody clicked on. It didn't work. It turned out the big insight there was replace it with a regular search engine and then add kind of Q&A on top of that. So there was always an answer on the page. And our user growth skyrocketed. We're the only search engine to gain market share other than Google after the launch of Google.
Wow.
And that's why we had a big audience, but they barely ever used it. They used it like one day a month. If we got them to use it 2 days a month, it was linear. It was twice as many searches and it was twice as much revenue. So that's how we turned that company around. At CBS, we had 30 million people a month streaming a few episodes a month on CBS.com. We were not allowed by my bosses to have an iPad app. Mobile was only 6% of our traffic at CBS Interactive. We were a top 10 internet property, hundreds of millions of users a month. We only had 6% mobile. 5 years later, it was 60% mobile. But historically speaking, we'd stream Super Bowls. They launched March Madness on Demand, which was one of the first paid streaming things that you could buy, in the App Store. There were paid versions of 60 Minutes. There was a paid version of Big Brother where you could stream the household 24 hours a day for like $4 a month. And there was like 200,000 people paying for that. So we looked at all that and we just said, and this is in 2011, we just said, I bet we could get a big percentage of those tens of millions of people using CBS.com to pay us. Evernote can do it. They have millions of people. Some pay for subscriptions for an Evernote, right? As one example. Freemium, Spotify, same thing. Pandora. I bet we could do that. And so that's what it took us 3 years to actually get that project approved, built, and launched. And then another 3 years to get our first original show, which was Star Trek Discovery. But we got things started then. We launched it in 2014. And so today, combined, CBS and Showtime are the fourth largest, because Showtime, we also own Showtime. We built a separate product for them. Combined, the fourth largest after Netflix, Amazon, and Hulu. Sorry, now we're fifth. I take it back. Now you have Disney Plus, but that's not.
Yeah, that's still pretty good. That's incredible, actually. Just like I
had our work,
and I had no idea how big Tinder was myself, also. And again, like I say, maybe one reason you migrated because you have a vision for it. But one thing that interests me, it's not only the #1 dating app in over 100 countries, but in 114 countries, if you take non-gaming apps, gaming apps make a lot of money. You're the #1 revenue app. Yeah. And I think the #1 in the world, other than gaming. So I didn't realize how international you are. And I taught you in the international business class, but you had the talent. They say those who can, whatever, do. But so you're in all these countries, but you're also a new leader. How are you leveraging the brand internationally, and how are you going to develop products, particularly to scale internationally?
Well, the great thing with Tinder, and one of the things that attracted me to it, and going back, I actually knew the founders of Tinder. When I did my startup, it was in LA, and I was introduced to these kids out of USC, which is a horrible college, but they were okay. UCLA. So I knew the company a long time, and then Tinder was incubated inside of IAC, Barry Diller's company, where I had worked. Oh, yeah. So all through the years, I stayed in touch with the company and knew it, and knew how big it really was and how successful it was. And one of the things I was looking for in my next job was, I probably wasn't going to go start another company. I went to be an entrepreneur in residence at Benchmark Capital, just in case. But within 2 months of me joining, COVID hit. And I looked at another big public company CEO job, and the people at Tinder and Match, who I know from my old life, kind of came my way, and over a number of months, we batted the idea around of me joining. And at the end of the day, it's probably one of the 20 best brands in the history of the internet. Everybody knows Tinder. Yes. I do think that kind of what I bring to the table is something that they've never really had before in terms of being the type of product person I am, leader. That's a new thing to the mix. The team is whip smart. It is extremely international, and it's the first brand I've ever managed that's had such a commanding lead in the space. I mean, it dwarfs everybody else. Bumble is the second largest, and it'll probably go public next year. But Tinder is just massive, and in all these countries, #1 over 100 countries. So that was all very attractive. It's still pretty much the same core product it's always been, where swipe left, swipe right, match, connect. It has evolved. And so, whereas in the early days, you might have thought of it as something created by some guys in West Hollywood to meet girls in West Hollywood, the truth is it is now used, it's solidly an 18 to 25-year-old product. I think at 25 years old, we hand the baton off to Hinge and Bumble. You know, when you're 18 to 25, you want to play the field. You want to, and some people might meet somebody for a short period of time. I actually think there's an argument to be made. If you look at the stats, we're one of the leading sources of marriage in the United States and other countries as well. Everything can happen on Tinder. But what hasn't happened is maybe creating new surface areas within the app that you could launch new things. You said video. We actually, this is before me, we just ran the second version of this in my first few weeks, had something called Swipe Night, which was a Tinder produced, very high-end, well-produced, choose your own adventure, kind of like Bandersnatch on Black Mirror, for anyone who saw that, but hosted within Tinder. It went nuts. It was the highest daily active users the company's ever seen. People could put a badge for which part of the choose your own adventure they chose and match with others that way. So it was still in service of matching people. It wasn't just to have ad dollars or something like that. And it really taught me that there are tons of opportunities for Tinder. They're pretty unique to Tinder because it is really a social discovery service. It's not trying to just be for candlelight dinners and matching people up later in life. There's a lot of things happening there. So then the last thing to your point is, it's essentially the same product in every country. Now the countries are different. So we're the #1 app in India, but obviously matrimony is a much bigger thing there, and matchmaking, and so it's slightly different. The younger people get, I would argue globally, the more they're the same, meaning they're a little more liberal and more free that way. Japan, very similar, where in that market, it's a little more matrimony focused. Brazil, I mean, you could not have a better market for the Tinder brand than Brazil. I mean, it is, people are just want to meet other people. They're very fluid in almost every way you could think of. And, that's what Tinder really is. So we're in all those places.
I have to personalize at least one thing, which is, as you know, I lost my wife a few years ago. And after a period of grief, I was ready to start dating. And I was very fortunate. I showed up on CNN with an anchor woman, Natalie Allen, and we had so many common interests. So now we're engaged. But let's say people of different ages. Like you said, when you think of Tinder, you do think of an 18 to 25-year-old.
Yeah.
Within Match, or even as brand extensions of Tinder, will you be able, do you think, to convince older people like myself that this is a way to go? And will you have to approach it in different ways? Some might be more multimedia, some might be more checked out and almost verified. Where do you see, I know there's a lot of business because you're going global. So there's a lot of 18 to 25-year-olds globally when you add it up. But what about the age range from 18 to 80?
So first of all, Tinder is for all age groups. So it's just, the audience is so big that we do hit a lot of people in every one of those age groups. Exactly. But the core, 60 to 70% of the users are 18 to 25. That's absolutely who the core Tinder user is today, and who I hope it will be 20 years from now, if we do our job right. And we need to evolve as each generation comes into play. Right now that's Gen Z, right?
That's right.
10 years from now, it's going to be a different generation. And they really are all different,
That's right.
One of the great things about Match Group is that there are different dating products for different segments.
That's right.
So for old people, there literally is for an older generation, a product called Our Time, which is #1 in that. There are ethnically focused ones like BLK for the Black community, Chispa for the Latinx community. So there are variations like that. And then there are different flavors of it. OkCupid and Plenty of Fish. We also own the original Match.com. And then the one that's growing the most right now is Hinge. Which I say, it's an incredibly well done product, and is small but growing like a weed. I'd say most of the people on here right now have probably heard of it, and if you're single, are probably on Hinge, because it's just a great product. Again, I think it's for a different stage of life, and and or dating at least than what Tinder provides, which is why we're broader and have a bigger audience. But they do a very, very good job. So yeah, that segmentation is very common in the category. Then the other trend is social. So Facebook launched Facebook Dating to try to compete with us. They just launched in Europe yesterday. You have, I think especially during COVID, people sliding into each other's DMs on Instagram became a bigger thing. Snapchat dating became a thing. So, that's all on the table. And but at the end of the day, it's probably one of the three things that survives COVID the best. That's a core user need. And that's another attractive thing about it for me.
Well, that's what I was thinking with your innovativeness. I'd like to talk about, like you say, you're segmenting, and I think things like diversity mean a lot to you. Are you going to be working on initiatives that would make, let's say, LGBTQ persons or transgender persons, et cetera, feel that, Tinder is much more congenial than other sites? I think it already is than many, but
it is. But although if you're a member of if you're a member of the transgender community, I think historically speaking, there were some issues with Tinder that the team that I inherited is extremely passionate about solving. That's been one of the best things about joining is, the average age of my company is 26. 70% of my employees are under the age of 34.
Wow.
And it's a very young group that has a very big heart. And is extremely, feels very passionate about diversity and solving that issue, solving every unique issue for every segment. So again, for every demographic, I mean, we'll get to it because we're a fairly small team in a lot of ways, but those are all things we're trying to do. Internally at the company, it's even, they're almost even more passionate. And there's the employee resource groups for all of them. I have a lunch every week with one of those groups. It was the Latinx group this week, and they're all advocating for their own communities and how they can show up to work and be treated fairly, and push the unique needs that they have when they come to work with others. And so that's I think that's been great to see, and is really the trend, because I think, some people may know there's actually been a bit of a debate in Silicon Valley over the past few weeks. There's been a company or two that came out saying that they're not going to be political, that they're not going to push a set of values that doesn't have anything to do with winning as a business, in terms of their metrics. And, Xander Lurie at SurveyMonkey and I share a lot of passion about this. I think what we would view it as the world is moving from what we used to call shareholder management, and then that's your main constituent is Wall Street, to stakeholder management, and giving an equal seat at the table to shareholders, employees, your customers, your community. Those are all part of it. And luckily that really coincides with the Gen Z audience that that uses Tinder. And so our values, I think, match up very well with that group.
It does. And our dean and the president of Emory, we see, and the faculty, the students, the alumni see that there is no, for instance, justice system in the US. There's a injustice system, and there's a lot of inequality, and in particular, racial inequality. But it does seem like you as a CEO, you have to look along that continuum of a pure kind of finance professor model. You only have one stakeholder, and that's the share owner, to a model of we have to have metrics like 50% of the board must be women, et cetera. Where in Canada or Sweden, they begin to mandate what percent of the board should be, say, women. Where do you come up?
California is something similar.
And would government have a role to play, or is it something that government should not have a role to play, in the corporate behavior toward this?
Yeah, look, I mean, I do think that's going to wind up being a state by state thing. So California, where I operate, and I'm on the board of GoPro, which is a public company in California. That's kind of that next year is a mandate. So 50-50 for the board. Look, the male-female ratio, just as one example, is the most obvious one to solve. It's a joke companies need to be more diverse, and that's also, but like, let's just start with gender balance. In my first month here, I took the exec team from 30% female to 60% female.
Wow.
And, one of the biggest, misses that I saw internally was not enough product managers were women.
Yeah.
On the team. And you could see it in the data, you could see it in the user experience that the product wasn't working exactly right for women. And there were a lot of good-hearted men trying to solve that problem for women, but it's not the same thing.
Yeah.
Even looking at data differently, if it's, and so you got to work, and that has to happen by ethnicity and sexual preference, and there's all these different ways. Especially the bigger your company is, the more opportunities you have. What I will say also, and people should feel good about this, at least as far as Silicon Valley is concerned, I mean, it is, everybody's woken up to the message, and it is extremely competitive for diverse candidates now. I mean, extremely competitive. So it's happening, but the wheels are absolutely turning on this.
And that's why I'm glad you and Xander realize that we're really a great home, as you know, for Black students, for women students, for LGBTQ and transgender persons. And because you went to the law school and the business school. And it's interesting that you're 60% women from 30%, because you say from the product experience, but yourself as a graduate of a law school, you realize law schools and medical schools, good undergraduate colleges, they're at least 56% women. And they may be 60% if they went strictly on merit. They just make it a little easier for men, because of merit. You might have heard a thing. I got a great question in from an alumni, Eugenia Adinoy. How do you keep yourself motivated and avoid burnout? You've been, through a lot in your career.
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of people I don't know. I will be turning 50 in January. That happened really fast.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I did have some people say to me like, oh, is that it for you? Are you done after this and whatever? And I didn't even think of it. Like, I honestly don't feel any different. And I think that's partly because running a startup, you feel like hell. When I was in my 20s. I just have always been, I think, self-motivated person. I think that's just, some people are like that. I've always been like that. Not about money necessarily. I've never done anything just for the money, and I probably could have made more doing other things than I've necessarily done. I tend to get very passionate about products. I get very attached to my teams, building great teams where we are very close, and I still talk to my old CBS team. It's been almost a year since I left, and I still talk to them many times a week. I love that part of it, and I love winning. And if there's a challenging set of fact pattern and whatever, so I'm, it's a different, some people I think are just ambitious for a certain kind of success. I don't know, my ambition's more around doing great work with interesting teams on interesting problems.
I think it's that emotional intelligence that you spoke about and what I spoke about, your sense of humor. You do keep perspective on things and you're competitive, but you also keep balance, good kids.
That's another good point. I'm definitely very competitive.
Yeah. But, a lot of kids don't speak to their parents when they're CEOs, et cetera, whereas yours do. Now I was
an only child, but I have to.
Yeah, no wonder. That's good. I have a very good question from Jennifer Montlary, another alumni, and she'd like to discuss the timing of reinventing yourself. How do you know, for all the alumni out there, how do you know it's time to try something new versus just time to dig in more where you are? And basically, I like how she puts this. Jennifer says she's interested in your take on when do you know when to hold them and when do you know when to fold them? Or how do you know when to fold them?
Well, I mean, actually, I think we covered some of that earlier in the when to pivot thing, but I would additionally throw into there that, there have just been times in my life where over time you learn from pattern recognition, you just have these moments, right? And it could be, now's the right time to switch. It could be, I just know that I got to make this investment. This company has it. And I would argue that you regret the acts of omission much more in life than you regret the acts of commission, right? What happens if you didn't go on CNN that night, right? Like,
right.
it's just those little extra things. And for me, there have been examples like that where I didn't want to go to some event that my friend asked me to be at, and I wound up meeting somebody who became an important part of my network or a friend or something.
That's right.
So I would just say following your instincts and just learning to be tuned into that moment, in addition to kind of what I said before on, different actual life factors that would make you make a switch.
No, I like that. And then there's a question that literally does come in from an alumni, but as a professor, I'm interested. What are your top 3 book recommendations for either business or personal development?
It's a good question. So for the best book I've ever read about being an entrepreneur is Shoe Dog by Phil Knight, about how he created Nike.
Yeah.
Like, just talk about the fact that things don't happen overnight. And what he had to do to put that company on its back. Now you think about like Coca-Cola and Google, it's just one of the iconic brands in the world, but that is absolutely not how it started, and it took a long time, and I love that journey. I'll give you two on management. One, like the best book on tactical management, and it is a tech industry book, but is called High Output Management. It's by Andy Grove, the founder of Intel.
Oh, yes.
It's a really good X's and O's book on management. It's influenced a lot of people, but the best, let's call it EQ book for management is Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin, about President Lincoln and his administration.
Yeah. No, I hope everyone reads that. And in fact, I have 2 copies. I'm not sure why, except I want it close to me. Natalie, in the background, because she's interested in, in your great career. Natalie, but you said your friend wrote the Shoe Dog's book. What's his name?
Phil Knight.
J.R. Mullender, he's a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter.
Oh, well, I've never heard of him.
J.R. Mullender. So everyone should read. He's a great writer. I always wonder where he fit. Now,
I do have one more book. I just don't know who wrote it. It's called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy.
Oh, that one I don't know.
And I'm trying to remember who wrote it, but that is a really good summation of strategy. Way better than like Porter's 5 Forces or the things you've learned in business school.
They've gotten enough of
this
that.
Is very dead simple, but it teaches you what is strategy and what's not. All right, that's it.
And I'm going to throw one in, not to be professorial, but because it reflects what you were talking about. Because A Whole New Mind, whole with a W, by Daniel Pink, where he says leaders of the future will have to be left-brained, organized, can do math like you can get through law school, which is very kind of left-brain organized, but also right-brain. You were talking about being empathetic, having high emotional intelligence, and you have creativity. Even starting at the very beginning with Etor, you were more the creative person. So I recommend that because it kind of fits in what you have and others. Which
one is that? Is that Range?
A Whole New Mind by Daniel Pink, where you combine both hemispheres. So many people are one hemisphere dominant or the other. Like it's nice that they're empathetic, but they can't do the math. Whereas you can, or they could be, let's say, person good with the numbers, but they have no ability to lead a team like you do. I think
the chat group is blowing up here. They're like listening.
Oh, I know. You're a popular guy.
By the way, that book Range that everybody has been talking about the past 6 months, it wasn't that mind-blowing to me. I'm like, oh, you should be well-rounded. Okay. Yeah. Like I could have read the summary, the Blinkist version of that.
Yeah. We were talking about being one came in, I think was stimulated by that. What periodicals, The Economist or anything, what websites, what blogs, whatever do you recommend? And again, I'm targeting alumni as well as students, especially as part of lifelong learning. What are some things they should keep up with?
I would say, I'm a voracious online reader. Whenever people say they read for half an hour to an hour in the morning, I'm like, I barely even get started with a half an hour to an hour. Because first of all, my Twitter feed has been super curated for 11 or 12 years, and I always build on that. And I like to follow and unfollow people, like to pick up different stuff.
Yeah.
And I do like to hear different perspectives, not, super crazy fake news, Fox News perspectives, but actual real news perspectives. So I use that, and newsletters like Axios and other things. Again, the more neutral and newsworthy it is. In the tech world, the information is a really good one. Again, Axios has some that are down the pathway on the technology front. And then I bounce between things like Apple News, and which I've started playing around with, and others. But really, if I were to say the app I open the most for news, it's Twitter. I mean, I'm just all over it. Because again, I use The Athletic for sports, and there's a local one in San Francisco called SF Gate. I'll use that, CNBC for something, but it all kind of comes together in Twitter. There was a quote years ago that said by a young person saying, like, why do I need to read the news? The news will find me. Right? Like the Rudy Giuliani thing yesterday, it found me.
Wow, look at that. The Giuliani thing was crazy. Now, I want to turn to disruption, because that is a theme throughout this Distinguished Speaker Series. It's hard to imagine someone who faced more disruption, because you are already moving to a new industry, a new job as the leader. You're in San Francisco. The clients are literally worldwide, as we talked about. A lot of the team may be in Texas, I believe, and around the world. And then all of a sudden there's total disruption, and you're meeting a new team, motivating them on Zoom from San Francisco.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about becoming a CEO of a new operation in general? What are the things you do as a new leader? Or it doesn't have to be a CEO, as our alumni progress when they move into a new leadership role, and also at a time of disruption.
Yeah, look, I'm sure everybody on this call has had to go through that same thing. And as somebody who wasn't really working those previous months before I started this job, I was an entrepreneur in residence, but it was COVID. So I was mostly in Lake Tahoe, messing around with my family, my friends, doing a lot of mountain biking. I was not prepared for Zoom life. And I had, all my former employees telling me how rough it was, and I had no sympathy. I was like, give me a break. You're on video. You don't have to commute anymore. Wow, was I wrong? I mean, Zoom life is a real thing. And if you are doing what I'm doing, which is essentially 7 or 8 in the morning, all the way to the end of the day with, barely a lunch break, I don't know what it is. It is absolutely mentally exhausting. It's there's never been a day that I've been working that I didn't get out of bed and go, let's go. I always feel like that. But I've never had it where at 3 o'clock I start going, wait, is this day almost over? It does feel like.
No, that's right.
So I do have the sympathy now. But what it has enabled me to do is have 3 to 4 times as many interactions with my team as I would have in person. Because first of all, most of my team is in LA, so I would have had to be flying down there, staying in a hotel. People have to commute, have dentist, appointments, have their kids school, all these different things. I wouldn't be able to meet my team in Japan or, Paris, because you'd say, hey, I can't wait to meet you when I fly over there. Because I don't know why, but we all never really used video as much. It was like video conference meetings.
No, you're right.
And so it is actually enabled me to have a lot more interaction, so that when I did meet the team, we've met twice now in LA, my exec team. Okay. We got, nose swabbed and COVID tested, and we had some meetings. It really did feel like we already knew each other. It really did. And it was a lot easier. So I think there's been some value to how we do this. And we clearly won't go back, any of us, I don't think, to the way it was. There's going to be some combination of the two that'll be the new normal in 2022 or whenever we really go back to work.
No, you're right. And Delta, for instance, isn't predicting, even once they have a vaccine, that they'll be back to the same amount of first-class seats and business class seats.
No.
It's going to be
by the way, I was on the road 75% of the time for 9 years at that last company. I was in New York 35 times in 60 weeks. Wow. For the whole week.
Living in the
Why
West.
would I ever do that now?
Yeah, living on the West Coast. You look good for a guy. Einstein would have aged you or something. It was
too much. You want to go in? That was crazy. Yeah. So this has been good in a lot of ways.
Oh, it has been, and I think for every aspect. Now, comes from someone who's been one of my great executive MBA students, I believe, Himaya Sonthi, and she asked, how do you test your own product at Tinder? What is the process you go about testing it?
Yeah, look, I'm one of those people, I can answer every question. That one's a little trickier, and so I won't give away all the details of it, but you're right. Like, I never had a product before that I was not the target.
Yeah.
I mean, I was not a big CBS watcher. I'm more of a high-end premium cable watcher, to be honest. So I did learn something about segmentation with CBS that, only 1 million people a month watch Succession on HBO or per episode. Tens of millions watch CBS shows. So you don't judge who watches what. And here, though, I'm definitely not the target audience, but at least I've had the experience that says I don't have to be. I'm not going to put my values on 18 to 25-year-olds who are single and looking for a relationship or looking to connect. So even without using the product, I think that experience for me in 23 years of managing consumer internet products of all different kinds has been extremely valuable and helps me do that. That said, I have found ways to test the product both as a man and a woman to see both experiences and our competitors. Yeah. So, we have some kind of, secret sauce ways of doing that where it's not catfishing, you're not being dishonest, you're mostly, right. But you are able to do it.
That's right.
It's not the same thing though, and it's not the same for men as it is for women. I've seen the experience for women is absolutely just eye-poppingly different. Yeah. And so, but it is very important, that question, how to make better products. You have to use them.
Yeah. No, but I'm glad that you, on any one of those issues we talked about segmentation, making various groups feel comfortable, you see the future and you're trying to, progress toward a better future. I have a question. We have only a couple minutes left. So a question that's very broad and ties in with you and I both being interested in international. Do you care to opine in all about TikTok and China and anything about that or that intersection? And I know Tinder is used a lot in China, maybe in various ways, but yeah.
It's Tinder is unofficially in China.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting though, the fastest growing product in this category is called Tantan, and it's a Chinese knockoff of Tinder that is now actually innovated in a bunch of ways Tinder hasn't, and is now in Japan. It actually just got banned in India, but it's in Japan, it's in Korea, it's expanding out. So these apps are there. I have a little bit different view of China because I managed for my first 4.5 years at CBS, I had 3,000 employees in China, and I had 15 of the top, what used to be called websites, now are just web properties because it's mostly mobile in China. I had a top 3 auto property, top 3 fashion property, and top 3 tech property, and then 12 other ones. And I would go over every quarter and know the team. I think demonizing them and stigmatizing them is absolutely wrong. There are ways that they've certainly taken advantage of us, as a country, in terms of some of that. But I refuse to believe that we're going to stop working with China. We're going to ban their products. I love that video of the girl who said she would rather move to China than give up TikTok. I think that's we're going back from a global world. And I think the Chinese have to be some of our best allies for the United States in the future. And there's clearly going to be some rough patches. And by the way, they don't have an open internet, right? No. Try going to China and using Google or Facebook. You can't. So this does cut both ways. But I know Yiming from TikTok and some people on the team there. My daughters love the product. Yeah. And it really created a whole new surface area and video that's absolutely here to stay. There's zero doubt about that. But as countries will have our differences, and as economies will have our differences. But I'm pro our partnership in the future, as rough as it may be from time to time. Yeah,
you're right. There's only going to be 2 superpowers, so we better learn to coexist cooperate as well as compete or something. In my last minute, I want to tell a Jim story, because with your success, people probably wonder, is he genuine? And you gave the example of when people are interviewed, how do they treat the wait staff? Or how do you treat the secretary, either him or her, of the CEO? You might go into the interview with the CEO, then you don't treat the staff well. You were representing CBS when CBS was the person broadcasting and in charge of the Super Bowl, which happened to be in Atlanta. And you literally had meetings lined up with John Malone, Barry Diller, but then also the Peyton Mannings of the world that are always there at the Super Bowl. And I know if Andrea Hirschhatter or Julie Barefoot or myself ask you if you have time to come over and meet some students and share ideas with them and do Q&A with them, you always try to fit it in. So literally you came over, I asked if you could meet about 12 students and you were answering their questions. And I'm like, Peyton Manning is waiting on you and Barry Diller. And so you were so kind. And then I figured I'll walk you out to your limo since you were, one of the top 2 or 3.
Uber, it wasn't a limo.
Yeah. And you're like, well, the Uber will come eventually. And I'm like, half the world is waiting on you, So I wanted to tell you, just say everyone, you're a very genuine person, and we're all very proud of you. And again, what you do, there's many places you give anonymous charity that we don't know about, and that tells something about the integrity of you and Shannon. But I'll hand it back to the dean now. Thanks.
I appreciate it. I appreciate everyone having me. I love Emory, and make sure everyone votes, especially down in Georgia. Let's go. We're counting on you.
Unfortunately, we've come to the end of our time together. This was an amazing conversation. And listening to you talk, Jim, about the values you bring to your organization and how you think about your leadership role, it's clear that you exemplify the principled leader who focuses on improving business and society. And that's what we here at Goizueta strive every day to develop in our students. Thank you, Professor Rosensweig, for leading this conversation. And thank you, Jim, for your time today and for your continued engagement with Goizueta Business School, Emory Law School, and Emory University.